Peter.
Thank you, George, and hello everybody. I've noticed in the room we're hotting up. We've got people from Australia, people wishing they were in Italy, as well as people from Italy. So welcome to you all from around the world. Those of you who are regulars to this, you'll know that I like to just give a quick description of the work of the Church's Conservation Trust before we start, and let you know what's been going on. So we were set up in 1969 as a charity, a partnership between church and state, effectively, to save those historic churches which no longer had a viable congregation but were of such historic importance that they needed to be saved on behalf of the nation. So since 1969 we've collected 356 historic churches, and we take on about 2 or 3 more every year, and we'd probably take on more if there was more funding for us. We're generously supported by the government through the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and the Church Commissioners. And then we effectively double the money that's invested in us by those 2 organisations by fundraising and through commercial activity as well. And I'm sure if you haven't been champing yet, it is the perfect self-isolating, social distancing holiday where you get to spend a night in one of our beautiful medieval churches. It's champing.co.uk. Go and book now, and you can have a great socially distanced staycation in the UK this year. So COVID-19 has really hit us quite hard, as it has for many other organisations and people across the country. We reckon there's somewhere between a £500,000 and £600,000 gap in our funding this year through income which we would have had through events, through our commercial activity, and other means of raising money. So your support is really valued. We think that these buildings are really important. We want to share why we love them so much, hence we've been putting on these series of free lectures. But please do support us in any way you can. Do sign up to be a member, do donate, or just sign up to keep in touch with us on our newsletter. Historic parish churches are the most democratic of historic buildings. They tell a story of absolutely everybody, and they tell a story of national and international politics and intrigue, as well as a local story better than any other building type in the world. The English parish church is a very powerful thing, and we really don't want them to be misunderstood by society into the future. And we think that every generation should have the opportunity to view and value these buildings well into the future. So your support is absolutely vital. Give money, but also go and visit these places and give your support and use and love them well into the future. So, having extolled the virtues of the English parish church, we're going to be transported to Italy. Italy, and backwards in time by quite some margin. I've learned a lot already this morning, and I'm about to learn an awful lot more about Matilda of Canossa. I got the name wrong earlier, so I'm very good I've pronounced that correctly. And I'm really delighted that we've got Michelle Spike with us today, all the way from the United States, to give a lecture. I asked Michelle earlier why she'd researched this Matilda in particular, and was one that she'd moved to Italy and had to learn Italian. What a way to learn Italian, by researching a famous historical figure. Quite impressive. But also, Michelle is a member of the Bar of New York State as well, and I'm sure she will explain to you the importance in legal terms of the history of Matilda. So, without further ado, the other thing I will say is that Michelle has actually published on Matilda as well. I'm sure she'll tell you about that book as well. And without further ado, let me hand over to Michelle, because you really need to hear from her. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to put my screen on. And I've got to get the button here. Okay. Okay, are we live? I hope so. Good afternoon. I am so pleased that George Reynolds asked me to participate in this luncheon series of lectures, because there is really nothing I enjoy talking about more than Matilda of Canossa. And as the title of my book, On 100 Churches, about Matilda of Canossa will indicate, I truly believe in the Church's Conservation Trust mission to conserve and preserve English medieval churches. Matilda of Canossa was born in 1046 and near Mantua, and she died in 1115, also near Mantua, and that's 905 years ago. And she died on the eve of the feast of St. James, who is the patron saint of pilgrims, to whom her last church was dedicated. Matilda is known in Italy as the Gran Contessa because of her leadership throughout her ancestral lands that extended from Mantua in the north all the way to the northern border of Rome. Her influence in Italy north of Rome is tangible. She was the most prolific patron of Romanesque architecture, and she tirelessly sponsored the construction and conservation of churches and abbeys, and at least one beautiful bridge. The guide, which I wrote, is laid out in 10 itineraries and catalogs at least 136 churches to which she is connected by manuscripts and documents issued during her lifetime, as well as many credible oral traditions. This is Matilda right here in the center of the cover. She is wearing a simple gold dress and a green mantle. In this illustration, she really does not look like the powerful warrior queen that she has been called by Dame Antonia Fraser, among others. And she doesn't even really look like a feudal princess, as she is mostly identified. Instead, this contemporary picture shows her as an intermediary between the townspeople who stand behind her and the church leadership to whom she speaks. The cover is taken from a Latin manuscript that describes the construction of a cathedral in Modena, Italy. Written during Matilda's lifetime, so it was written 1099 to 1106, the author recorded the debates of the citizens of Modena as they constructed their cathedral, which replaced a ruined 5th century church that had been built over the tomb of their bishop, Geminiano, who died on January 31st, 397. And he is revered in Modena as the protector of the city against barbarian invaders. The citizens of Modena hired the architect, and this is the architect right here. He's named Lanfranc, and he directed the building of the cathedral. Matilda appears in 2 sections. This one we already saw, and here you can see her in front of the tomb of San Gimignano, which was opened by papal decree for one night between October 7th and October 8th, 1106. And the town citizens came to see the uncorrupted body of the saint. Matilda holds a gold vase representing the various treasures that she contributed to the cathedral's construction and to the lives of the canons who served the cathedral. This is the crypt of the church of the Cathedral of San Gimignano in Modena, and the tomb, the 5th century tomb, is still there, and you can compare the tomb here to the illustration there. Gimignano governed Modena after the state of ancient Rome had decayed. He was above all a political leader who protected his community as an island of civilization carved out of confusion and chaos of the barbarian invasions that descended in waves upon Italy after the collapse of ancient Rome. Bishops like Gimignano are the saints of Matilda's moment, which historians call the investiture conflict or the Gregorian reform of the Roman Church. The impetus for this reform began in France with Benedictine monks at the monastery of Cluny. They sought to reform the church to its spiritual roots and to liberate its administrative heads, its bishops, from feudal laws that had been in place since the Saxon Otto I in 960. And this is the front of the Cathedral of Modena, built in 1106, still there in the Centro Storico of Modena. You may recognize the piazza, which is where the funeral of the great Italian tenor, Luciano Pavarotti, was held a few years ago. This cathedral, like others built in the center of northern Italian towns, are the result of Matilda's political policy, created together with Gregory VII, who was Pope, to return the bishops who administered these towns to the authority of papal Rome. In the process, Matilda's domains became social communities, independent of feudal restraints and feudal taxes. These cathedrals remained the vital centers of their towns, symbols of the citizens' independence and of what their community can accomplish when they work towards the common good. The most spectacular example of this is Florence's Cathedral of Santa Maria dei Fiori. The Florentines replaced the ancient Cathedral of Santa Reparata, and that's this little footprint there, conserved with various donations by Matilda and her mother Beatrice, and then vastly enlarged it, obviously, over the centuries. Today, the Cathedral of Santa Reparata is accessed by a stairway right here in the back of the nave, and you can see the floor and an altar from Matilda's time if you descend that stairway. After publication of Tuscan Countess, which is a biography I wrote about Matilda of Canossa in 2004, many towns in Italy invited me to lecture about the Countess. In every place, local authorities took me to visit their church, which is a sacred Romanesque space, beautifully maintained. Each church had been built per volontà della Contessa Matilda, that is, by the desire of Countess Matilda. And it is evidence that the legend that she built 100 churches throughout Italy was true. In the process of recording these churches on a map, I discovered that her building program also had a second purpose, and that was to unite papal Rome along safe, reliable routes to the bishops and clergy of the church. And pictured here are some beautiful churches, Romanesque churches, built by the Countess in Lombardy, Emilia, and Tuscany in northern Italy. Matilda was born into a period referred to as the Dark Ages, and more recently as the High Middle Ages, which began, according to one edition of the Cambridge Medieval History, with the Lombard invasion of Italy in 568, and it ended precisely in the year of Matilda's death, 1115, with what they called the beginning of the free Italian communes. Among the defining elements of this dark age was the disintegration of the roads that had connected ancient Rome to all parts of the empire, including England, with the result that agricultural lands returned to uncultivated woods and swamps. Travel and trade declined as danger and expense increased. Local feudal lords charged taxes on the use of roads, rivers, ports, markets, and other aspects of daily life. The taxes did not go to maintenance or to repair, but rather to the extravagant lifestyle of an ever-decreasing number of feudal nobles, which included Matilda's ancestors. Her great-grandfather, her grandfather, and her father had built fortifications on defensible hilltops for self-protection to control their territories and to collect taxes. And here you see some of her fortresses. Matilda used that network to her and to the church's advantage. She converted the fortresses into monasteries manned by monks. The monks were able to observe the armed knights who used the roads and routes that pass along to observe and pass on that information. The monks also, according to the rule of Saint Benedict, offered hospitality to pilgrims and to traveling merchants, helping to revive trade and commerce. And you can see from the map that Matildan churches are sited on defensive lines. So you look at here in this green line, this is the line of fortresses of Matilda's grandfather, Piadina to Legnago. And that was how they protected Italy from this. This is the route into the Brenner Pass that enters Italy from the north. Each one of these towns is now a town, not a fortress, and it has a Matildan church at the center. Here is the Rotonda di San Lorenzo, which is in Mantua. It was built by Matilda in 1081. Her churches are on both banks of the Po River. This is this blue line here, which goes that her territory ends at Brescello. Her, and pictured here is Santa Maria Assunta that is built at Follonica on the Po. The Basilica of Santa Maria Assunta was a Matilda fortress on the top of Monte Velio. And today the Basilica and the Pieve of Rubiano are still at the entrances to two passes through the Apennines, which enter into Tuscany. Her churches are along both sides of the Arno, and here you see San Salvatore at Fucecchio, which is here, and that stands at the crossroads between the Arno and the Via Francigena. And then there is also San Miniato al Tedesco, and that guards the Via Cassia between Florence and Lucca and Pisa, and the valleys of the Arno and Elsa River. Matildan churches stand about 20 kilometers or a day's walking journey apart. By 1115, the year of Matilda's death, pilgrimage, trade, and commerce in Europe revived. That Matilda intended to encourage this revival is evidenced by this beautiful bridge called the Ponte del Diavolo, which is attributable to Matilda and was built in the year 1100. The bridge crosses the Circio River and connects Lucca to a pass through the Apennines to the castle of Canossa and to Modena and Reggio on the Po River plain. With construction of this bridge, Matilda facilitated communication and trade between Emilia and Tuscany. The importance of Matilda's achievement cannot be underestimated. This is the first bridge built of stone over a river since the fall of ancient Rome, or for about 500 years. I think it was inspired by the Ponte Fabricius, which is built over the Tiber by ancient Roman architect in the year 62 AD. And you'll see a photo of that bridge in a later slide. Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, 1093 to 1109, recognized Matilda's assistance in his travels between Canterbury and Rome. He met her sometime at the end of 1104. And Matilda wrote a letter to Pope Paschal II on Anselm's behalf. That letter is today in a copy of it in Lambeth Palace in London. When the Archbishop returned to Canterbury, he sent Matilda a book of prayers and meditations to thank her for her assistance in his travels. The manuscript, dated 1105 to 1106, is today in a Benedictine monastery in Austria. The image on the frontispiece shows Matilda standing respectfully before the Archbishop, who, by virtue of his office, is seated on his cathedra. Again, Matilda shows no indicia either of feudal title or military power. The letter of dedication to Matilda begins here, under the Archbishop's portrait. It is addressed to Countess Matilda, worthy of reverence. The Archbishop writes that he sent her meditations, which he composed for the monks in his monastery, and he suggests that she choose those which interest her. The letter recognizes Matilda as an educated and faithful woman and an active participant in the learned circles of the Gregorian reform. The Archbishop of Canterbury could travel to Rome because of Matilda's network, and it ensured a safe route through northern Italy. Beyond her ancestral lands, her network connected to churches and hospices affiliated to the Abbey of Cluny that extended as far north as England and Canterbury. This Gregorian route, created by supporters of an integral administration of the Roman Church, provided the Pope in Rome a means to communicate with all Christian dioceses in Europe. This is Canossa at center. Many historians attribute Matilda's building program either to excessive female piety or to the hypnotic sway of the charismatic Pope Gregory VII. But I believe that she executed her building of churches for a strong personal reason and for clear political intelligence. Because the lecture is organized around your lunchtime, I thought we would discuss this around a Matildan appetizer, Reggiano Parmigiano cheese, on top of which is drizzled a balsamic vinegar to which I added a sprig of fresh basil for color. Matilda's castle of Canossa is still on the mountains, surrounded by manufacturers of Parmigiano cheese. And this is a photo of the Fabbrica, which is on the hill opposite Canossa. 3 forms of Reggiano Parmigiano are first mentioned as rent payable to the abbey at Merola in a document dated April 13th, 1159, for use of certain lands likely donated to the monks by Matilda when she established this monastery near Canossa in 1092. Balsamic vinegar is first mentioned in the biography of Matilda, written during her lifetime by a Benedictine monk named Donizzone. It was written in the last years of her life, between 1111 and 1115. Today, his manuscript is in the Vatican libraries. And here you see a bottle of balsamic vinegar being shown with Matilda's distinctive signature, which we will discuss a bit later in this lecture. These 2 portraits are from Donizzone's manuscript. The imposing figure at the far end is Matilda's father, Bonifacio, called Boniface in English. He was Duke of Tuscany and Margrave of Mantua. In the middle is Matilda, and here she looks much more like a feudal princess. They are both seated on thrones with gold bejeweled conical crowns and red velvet robes also studded with jewels. Matilda is flanked by the monk Donizzone, presenting his manuscript, and the captain of her army, Arduino of Palude. Donizzone stressed, likely at Matilda's request, her strong connection with and her inheritance from her paternal ancestors. Notwithstanding the fact that under Salic laws of the German kings, Conrad II, Henry III, and Henry IV, only men could inherit and administer feudal property. When Matilda was born, her father was likely the richest man in his world. The dynasty began at the castle of Canossa, represented by that blue dot. The family became rich, acquiring ever-increasing territories by feudal grants from the German kings, and that's the areas outlined in blue. Eventually, they controlled entry into Italy from the north, the river ports on both the Adriatic and the Mediterranean Sea, and every road to Rome. Bonifacio's vassals guarded these markets, roads, and river ports, collecting taxes that made them well off, and Bonifacio very, very rich. Pilgrims and travelers recorded that Bonifacio was harsh and cruel. Donizzone wrote that Bonifacio was not shy about flaunting his wealth. In the spring of 1046, as soon as Conrad's son, the new German king Henry III, arrived in Italy, he asked Bonifacio to send him the celebrated vinegar, which was made at the fortress of Canossa. Bonifacio delivered the balsamic vinegar in a specially made silver cask, drawn by 2 silver bulls, paired by a silver yoke, which was then brought in a cart pulled by 2 live oxen to the king, who was then at Piacenza. The monk records that the lavish magnificence of this gift, as well as other gifts equally extravagant, astonished the German king and his court, and it made the king, according to Donizzone, jealous of the vast wealth of his vassal Bonifacio. His envy became an obsession. On May 6, 1052, when Matilda was 6 years old, Bonifacio was assassinated on a hunt near Mantua. In the same year, his son, Matilda's older brother, and Bonifacio's only heir, was also mysteriously dead. Their deaths left 2 women in the house of Canossa, Matilda and her mother Beatrice of Lorraine, who is pictured at right in her portrait from Donizzone's manuscript. Neither woman had any rights under Salic law to Bonifacio's wealth. As king and as their closest male relation, Henry III took it all in a council at Florence in June of 1055. He escheated Bonifacio's feuds to himself, directed Bonifacio's wealth to his royal treasury, and he exiled to Germany Beatrice and her daughter Matilda, then 8 years old. Alone in an empire without any male protection, where wealth was acquired by violence and which gave no legal right to women either to own or to manage or to inherit feuds, Beatrice turned to the only other power besides the German king, the Pope in Rome, in the person of her uncle, Bruno of Toul, who was Pope Leo IX when Bonifacio died. The Pope arrived in Rome in 1049 with monks from the monastery of Cluny, including a young man named Hildebrand, who will become Pope Gregory VII. Over the next 25 years until her death in 1076, Beatrice managed to return to Italy with her daughter. She constructed an alliance with the supporters of church reform that laid the foundation for all of Matilda's politics. The alliance also empowered the priests and the monks who sought independence of the Roman Church from the German Empire. In 1073, Beatrice and Matilda supported the election of Hildebrand as Pope Gregory VII in opposition to the German king, Henry IV. At a Lenten synod in Rome in March 1075, Pope Gregory VII affirmed the reforms of the monks of Cluny, designed to eliminate royal interference in church administration, including the prohibition of clerical marriage, simony, and lay investiture. The reforms meant that the bishops who administered the imperial towns could only be appointed by the Pope in Rome. Gregory also announced that kings, like all mortals, are answerable to God and to God's representative on earth, the Pope in Rome. Entitled The Dictates of the Pope, the 27 handwritten statements completely upturned a feudal order that had been in place for over 100 years. That is the document at the right of your screen. During Gregory VII's papacy, Matilda lived in this tower, on the Isola Tiberina, at the foot of the oldest bridge in Rome, the Ponte Fabricius, which is over the Tiber River, and to which I referred to in this slide as the inspiration for the Ponte del Diavolo in an earlier slide. Their allies called Matilda Pope Gregory's most astute counselor. Their enemies accused her of being his mistress. Perhaps worse, their enemies accused the Pope of taking her and Beatrice's advice. Matilda's cousin, the Salian king, Henry IV, whose father Matilda blamed for her father's death, strongly opposed Gregory VII's declaration of the primacy of Rome, and he adamantly refused to concede his inherited prerogatives, that is, his ability to sell bishop sees and to appoint men loyal to himself to administer the cities in his realm. In January 1076, Henry IV called a council at Worms and demanded that the Pope resign. In February 1076, Pope Gregory VII excommunicated the king, relieving all Christians from their feudal oaths of loyalty and prohibiting all Christians from obeying him as king. It also was an issue in England. The English kings, William II and Henry I, also opposed the Pope's declaration, and they twice exiled St. Anselm from England over this issue. As you all know better than I do, the supremacy of the state over the Church of England was resolved 500 years later in favor of the English monarchy by Henry VIII in 1538. These are a few of the events that led to the famous confrontation between Pope Gregory VII and the King, Henry IV of Germany, at Matilda's castle of Canossa. And you can see it's still quite an isolated fortress nestled in the Apennine Mountains, south of Modena. The moment has been enshrined in our collective memory for nearly 1,000 years. All three protagonists left their record of the events, although it is the popes that history remembers. In a letter to the German dukes written immediately after, Pope Gregory wrote that between January 22nd and January 24th, 1077, Henry IV stood barefoot in the snow in penitential garb before the gate of Canossa, begging the Pope to pardon him for his sins and return him to communion with the Roman Church. Donizzone recorded Matilda's version. The monk wrote that Henry IV knelt before his cousin, Matilda, and begged her, in the presence of his godfather, the Abbot of Cluny, to help him. In this miniature from Donizzone, Henry wears his crown and holds the orb of his royal authority. Matilda sits under a canopy, wearing a simple veil. Henry, then 26, knelt before his cousin, a young woman of 28, who had no feudal standing in his kingdom, the widow of his murdered friend and knight, and a woman accused by his council of dukes and bishops of being one of the causes of his current predicament. He asked Matilda to intervene for him with the Pope, and she did. The Pope pardoned the king on January 25th, the day the church celebrates the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. As a condition to the pardon, the Pope demanded certain written promises from the king, and he demanded that Matilda guarantee those promises. Upon leaving Canossa, Henry IV immediately broke every promise he made. Having obtained his pardon and resumed his royal authority, Henry's biographer wrote that the king had outwitted the Pope, cleverly preventing Gregory from depriving him of his royal birthright. Henry remained in Italy after his absolution, hoping to kidnap the Pope and the countess, who, having been warned, remained in Matilda's impregnable fortress for a few months until Henry finally returned to Germany over the Alps. And this is the intensely personal reason for Matilda's construction of her 100 churches. I believe that Matilda spent the last 40 years of her life intentionally removing her father's territory, that is Italy, north of Rome, from Henry IV's control. A man who lied to her, a man who broke his promises to the Pope, and the son of the man Matilda blamed for the death of her father. Donizzone wrote, Matilda then left the part of the king and gave all her goods to St. Peter, who held the keys, as the divine doorkeeper, making him her heir and she the heir of Peter. She made her donation twice. After leaving Canossa, Matilda and the Pope spent about 6 months traveling through her territories and her cities and visiting the monasteries in her lands. They arrived in Rome in the fall of 1077. Donizzone wrote that Matilda made her donation at the Lateran Palace in the presence of the principal families of Rome. She made her donation again, a second time, at Canossa in 1102, after she had defeated the army of Henry IV and installed men loyal to the Gregorian reform in most of the dioceses of her ancestral lands. Canossa is remembered because it is perhaps the only time in history when the man who controlled the world's largest army was forced to kneel before a man who derived his authority from an invisible God. But the significance of Canossa is also this. In defiance of all feudal custom and of her place in a masculine feudal structure, Matilda abandoned Henry IV as her king because by his actions, he proved he did not deserve either her trust or her support. Matilda withdrew her ancestral lands from feudal Salic law, and she allied with Papal Rome, intending to build a new government, a better, less violent, more just government, with the church as its center, based on the model of ancient Christian Rome. In so doing, Matilda provided a Roman alternative to Henry's feudal system that transformed all of Europe, ending a dark age and moving Europe towards the Renaissance of architecture, literature, and art, all of which she revived and supported during her lifetime. Matilda accomplished this transfer physically by building the monasteries and churches throughout on every river, road, and mountain pass throughout Bonifazio's territories, except Spoleto, where she is never recorded. And that's the subject of this lecture. Matilda accomplished this transfer spiritually by ensuring that men loyal to papal Rome and not to the German king were installed as bishops in the communities of her domains. And this is the investiture controversy, which gets the most attention by historians. Less understood is that to effect the installation of bishops loyal to their sides in the northern Italian towns, Matilda, as well as her cousin Henry, each had to concede to the citizens of these towns freedoms from feudal taxes on the use of the surrounding forests, pastures, rivers, and roads, taxes which had made Bonifacio very rich and which had caused such envy in the heart of Henry III. Whether Matilda as a woman, without any feudal authority granted by any German king, had any right to collect these taxes is to me an open question. But there's no document that indicates she ever did. Instead, immediately after Canossa, Matilda gave the right to collect those taxes to the citizens of Pisa and Florence. And she gave the properties which controlled the collection of those taxes to the canons of the cathedrals in those towns. Her act compelled Henry IV to offer similar concessions to Pisa, Lucca, and Siena when he returned to Italy in 1081 to depose Gregory. And both he and Matilda offered competing freedoms to the citizens of Mantua when Henry IV returned again to Italy in 1090 to overcome Matilda's resistance. This accomplished her transfer to papal Rome economically as well. During her lifetime, citizens elected to town councils began to collect those feudal taxes and to use them to provide public services to the towns, and to raise militia to defend the town's walls, and Matilda rebuilt the walls of Florence in 1078, even against the imperial armies of the German kings. To the canons of the Cathedral of Pisa, Matilda gave her family's fortress at Livorno, which controls access to the Mediterranean for Pisa and Florence and the other communities along the Arno River. The economic independence is what gave the Italian communes the ability to resist Henry V and his successors when German kings attempted to reimpose feudal controls and taxes. And this is what began the era of the free Italian communes in the year of Matilda's death. To deliver justice to these towns and to give their citizens the ability to self-govern, Matilda asked a scholar to revive the study of the Corpus Juris Civilis, 4 volumes of Roman civil laws, compiled by the Christian Roman Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. Called the Light of the Law by the medievalist Mark Bloch, students of Anarius established the universities of Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, and provided men trained in the logic of law to administer these towns. By 1150, a monk named Gratian, a Tuscan who lived and taught in the monastery of San Felice in Bologna, compiled a book of canon law, incorporating Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis. His work provided a basis for the administration of an independent Roman Church. Justinian's laws also provided a legal argument to support Matilda's own claims. Under Justinian's novellas, daughters, like sons, have an equal right to inherit property and to own and administer it in their own names. Matilda announced her transfer of allegiance to papal Rome with every document she issued. In her first donations after Canossa in 1078, Matilda begins to sign her name in bold capital letters inside a hand-penned cross. She relies on no feudal titles. She lays claim to her ancestral inheritance for the Roman Church by the grace of the God who made her who she was. Compare her signature in 1078 with that of her mother Beatrice and herself in 1072, and you can see the confidence that this gave to her. At her death, Matilda was buried in the monastery of San Benedetto Po, near Mantua, which had been established by her grandfather in 1007, and to which Matilda made many donations, especially in the last 15 years of her life. She was buried in a chapel dedicated to St. Mary. The church had been destroyed by Henry IV in his siege of 1091, and it was rebuilt after Matilda defeated him in October of 1092. Her monument is this mosaic floor that is in front of her tomb, and it is indicative of the esteem and the respect with which she was held during her life. 4 small princesses stand before her tomb. They illustrate the 4 cardinal virtues of justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. These are qualities attributable to the countess and, I would say, to a wise ruler, exactly how she appeared in the first slide of this lecture. The medieval churches that Matilda built, and I believe the medieval English churches that the Trust conserves, are monuments to these virtues, as well as to the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Tranquil oases in this modern moment of chaos and confusion, the churches offer hope that a community can again become united for the common good under a wise ruler in a time to come. Matilda's request, the monks of San Benedetto Po said a mass in her memory and distributed food to the poor every Monday, on the first Monday of every month for 500 years. Until 1635, when Pope Urban VIII took her body to Rome. Her tomb today is in St. Peter's Basilica. The casket and statue carved by Gian Lorenzo Bernini show Matilda as a strong protector of the papacy. She is the only person, not a pope, who holds St. Peter's attributes of the keys to the kingdom of God. She is one of only 3 women buried in St. Peter's, which itself is a church benefited by the countess. Thank you very much for letting me share your lunch hour today. I don't know what happens now.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for that, Michelle. That really was fantastic. And I know a lot of people will have learned a lot from that. I know I certainly have taken a lot away from that as well. We're now going to go into question time. So everyone, please do use the comment box there and do comment away and put your questions down, and we'll ask Michelle. We've had some come in already, Michelle. So the first question that's come in was, did Matilda cause any churches to be built in Siena?
No.
No. Thank you. Well, there you go. That answers that question there.
She did not actually. She really stayed on those routes that I showed you.
Brilliant. And we've had here, what do you think was the largest church that she built?
Large is a strong question because every church she built was a Romanesque church, right? So they were small basilicas built on a Roman model, and they were built 905 years ago. So they mostly have been enlarged. But I would guess the most perfect church from her moment that has been preserved from that moment is Modena.
Modena. And you showed earlier on a bit about Florence Cathedral and the cathedral that she built there. You can go and sort of from that time the floor. So do we think that the floor that is underneath Florence Cathedral is the floor that she would have walked on?
Yeah. And her uncle, actually, one of her uncles was Pope Stephen IX, and he was buried there. So they have also there his pallium and I think his rosary on display. So there's a lot from Matilda's moment under the Santa Maria dei Fiori.
We've had a question here come from one of my members of staff. Given Pope Gregory's regard for Matilda, why do you think he mandated celibacy for the priesthood?
Celibacy has a long tradition and in the church. But there's also an economic reason, and if you read the old documents, what happened when priests got married was their wives, they would have children, and then children would want to inherit the church, which had an income. So it would remove from papal Rome, actually, the control over the parishes.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks everyone for the questions. Keep them coming in. Michelle, do you think there was any particular reason that Matilda's remains were moved to Rome when they were?
Yes, there's a clear reason. St. Peter's was rebuilt, if you remember, right? And Michelangelo did the dome. And so when Urban VIII was elected Pope, it was empty. And he actually had to fill it. And he had Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who was carving all this stuff. And Urban VIII was Tuscan. He was from Tuscany. And he even wrote a poem, an ode to Matilda of Canossa. He knew who she was. He was very respectful of what she had done for the church. The epigraph under her tomb extols her generosity to the church, and she's one of the foundations, actually, of St. Peter's. So yes, there's a clear reason, and that's it.
Thank you. What drew you to research Matilda?
What?
What drew you to research Matilda of Canossa?
What drew me to her?
Yeah.
Two things. So in 1991, excuse me, I'm not that old enough. In 1991, there was this wonderful exhibition in Palazzo Te in Mantua called Viligelmo e Matilda. And Viligelmo is the sculptor who did the who sculpted many things for Matilda of Canossa. His sculptures are incredible, and they're on the facade of the cathedral in Modena. And so the exhibition was about Matilda's patronage of this sculptor who really was one of the first Italian sculptors to create lifelike figures in stone. And I had never heard of Matilda of Canossa. So I thought, damn, I have to learn some Italian. So what I did was I bought all of the books about Matilda of Canossa, and I started to read them. And that just got me more and more interested in her. And then when as I'm a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, when I found out that she revived the Code of Justinian in 1088, and she established the first law school in the world, and she also, through that, gave women rights that they didn't have, and they still don't have in most parts of the world. I thought she was a person worthy of a lot of time, which I have given most of my life to.
It's certainly a worthy research project, and I think everyone who's watching has certainly learnt a new appreciation for Matilda and the legacy that she's left behind. We've got lots of questions coming, so I'm going to try and get through them quite quickly. But did Matilda speak German, Italian, or Latin? Do we know?
I do know. She was fluent in Italian, German, and French. When the medieval sort of forms of them, not obviously the modern forms. And she read and wrote in Latin.
Thank you. And I hope that answers the question there, but obviously she's very intelligent. What, in your opinion, because you mentioned that Modena is probably your favourite sort of church that she's behind and sort of best preserved and conserved. What makes Modena so special in your view?
The church?
Yeah.
Well, it is... It is the most, you know, San Benedetto Po is her church, right? Because her grandfather established it. And there's a little part of the Chapel of Mary where she's buried in it. But the church itself was rebuilt by the Gonzaga in the, I mean, that huge church that you saw on the slide, that is from the 1500s. So most of her churches have been rebuilt, but Modena is original to her moment. So, and it has these wonderful sculptures from Viligelmo on its facade, and it has these wonderful, I mean, just to see it, it's to go back in time, and it still has this tomb, right? You can just walk up to this tomb, exactly where Matilda was standing, stand and put your hand on top of the tomb, just like Matilda did. So it's really a remarkable 905-year-old a relic of her moment. And you also eat very well in Modena, so.
There's two reasons to definitely go then. Are there any scandals associated with her life?
Scandals associated with Matilda?
Yeah.
Thousands. I did not go into most of them, not because I didn't want to, but I really tried to make this lecture not too long. So I can come back and do a whole lecture on the scandals of Matilda of Canossa.
Thank you. Well, that sounds a really great offer there. We've got a couple more questions. How much input would Matilda have had regarding the architectural design of these churches? Did she was her role primarily just financing them, or did she really have an interest in how they were decorated, do you think?
I think she had a clear, when I say she revived, she had a clear intent to revive ancient Rome, right? When I say that, that is ancient Roman law, ancient Roman art, and ancient Roman architecture. So all of her churches are Romanesque. They're Romanesque because they look back to ancient Rome, because her idea, not actually quite a good idea, but her idea was that Rome was the center of the church. It's the center of Christian culture. And she was trying to revive a moment when Europe was united and well run for the people, not necessarily for the rich people, but for the people who lived there. And she did that. And so Romanesque architecture is just one aspect of an entire program that she had to revive this Roman culture. So all her churches look alike. They do.
Thanks, Michelle. We've had a question. I think we've got time for maybe two more questions. So we've had one here. I missed who she was married to. Wasn't it arranged marriage, her first one?
I didn't go into that either because I tried, but it just made the lecture way too long. She and her mother were married. Their marriage was arranged by Pope Leo IX. They were married to the cousins, first and second cousins, the Duke Godfreys of Lorraine. He was also a nephew of the Pope, and it was the beginning really of the axis that unites Florence to the Lorraine, which is the old, and Beatrice herself was of the highest nobility in Europe. She was a direct descendant of Charlemagne. So the arranged marriage was quite important for Matilda and her mother to get back and it was part of this alliance that Beatrice had worked out with her uncle, the Pope, and the man that Beatrice married was an enemy of the German kings. So it was a marriage that one of the reasons that Henry III came down and took all the property was because he was afraid that this axis was going to take away Italy from Germany, which eventually it did.
And we've got another one here quickly. Did she have any children, or were there any people who followed in her footsteps or that related to her that were talented women like she was, do you think?
She had one child with the husband who she left after 2 years, and she left him immediately after this child was born. There's a wonderful picture I had to take out of my lecture of the monastery that she founded for this child in Orval, which is in the Ardennes Mountains near the Lorraine. She did not have any, I can't find any women friends. I mean, there are people who say she knew this one or that one, but most of the people she knew and the people around her and the people she influenced were monks and priests. They were men. And I think she felt most comfortable with men based on what I've read.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Michelle, and thank you everyone for your questions and for taking time to join us for another Thursday lunchtime lecture. Now, as I said at the start, these lectures are completely free. This lecture has been recorded and we'll be making it available for you to watch whenever you like, free of charge shortly after this lecture finishes. But in return, please do consider making a donation if you enjoy these series and if you want us to continue doing them. As I said, you can text CCT to 70331 to give a gift of £3, or look at the video description and there's links to our website and other ways of joining or making a donation. Now, next week, we'll be joined by the curator of the Stained Glass Museum from Ely Cathedral, who'll be talking to us about the history of stained glass in parish churches. So do join us next week, next Thursday at 1 p.m, and do check out the event page, which has a bit more information about that lecture. But if you've got any questions or have any feedback, do send us a direct message. But once again, thank you so much for joining this week's lecture. Look forward to seeing you next week.